A few housekeeping rules. Please mute your microphone to help keep background noise to a minimum. Ensure you mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Be mindful of background noise. Position your camera properly. Questions should be typed into the chat box in order to limit distraction. Thank you. I'll now hand over to my colleague, Sarah, to introduce the keynote speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Obehi, for the introduction. So our first speaker for today is Ms. Chidimdu Odiego, and she is an associate partner at Delberg Country Director, Lagos. At Delberg, she has worked across various sectors, and including agriculture, gender, education and youth employment, job creation, renewable energy, health, investing for development, and financial inclusion. This has involved working with multilateral organizations, governments, foundations, and private companies to develop their strategy, create market entry models for new businesses, conduct human-centered design, and carry out landscape studies. Our work has included working with the MasterCard Foundation in Young Africa Works, an initiative that aims to ensure 30 million young people in Africa secure, dignified, and fulfilling work by 2030. Before joining Delberg, Chimdi worked at a commercial bank as a financial associate. She holds an MA in International Development and Economics from the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University and a BSc in Economics from Covenant University. So that wasting much of your time, I will just hand over to Ms. Chidimdu to take over and lead on to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And good afternoon to everybody. I will be sharing my screen in a minute. Great. So it's really good to be speaking to everybody and connecting to everybody on this topic, employability challenges and opportunities for growth, as this is really critical in Nigeria right now, and I would say generally in sub-Saharan Africa. For employability, what does employability really mean? Some people would say skills. Is it about getting a job? Is it about entrepreneurship? Is it about education or the attitudes that people have towards employability? And so for this, we're going to be looking at two main things. Employability means a set of skills, knowledge, and attributes that makes one more likely to gain employment and be successful. And this also involves anticipating and preparing for the future more effectively and entrepreneurially. I think one thing to note here is that for the skills, this refers to both the soft and hard skills that one needs to be mindful of. And anticipating and preparing for the future more effectively and entrepreneurially is a very key thing, primarily because employability is a lifelong thing. So we've also seen situations of people who have been in the workforce, but over time became obsolete because of changing skills, digital technology being used, and they weren't able to keep up. So how do we ensure that the skill set remains relevant and ready for the next phase of what the industry looks like? This situation is really important because, as we all know, youth unemployment in Nigeria is really there, and things could actually get worse. So this graph that you see in front of you is from the National Bureau of Statistics, and the figures, the last figures we have was Q4 2020. Hasn't been updated in a bit, but we can see that in Q2 2016, for example, youth unemployment was 18.4%. but now it's grown to about 42.5% as at the last official statistics from National Bureau of Statistics. And this represents a growth of about 23%. And so we can see that youth unemployment is getting worse. We know the effect this has on several things. It has an effect on the economy, has an effect on security issues, has an effect on our future ability to grow as a country, and also has an effect on the living conditions of people, because if people don't have access to income, then it affects their living conditions and ability to just purchase and access the basic things they need. So it's really important for us to improve employability to ensure that this youth unemployment rate we're seeing is not getting worse over the next few years. The challenges are known to a lot of us. So whether it's from the education systems, a lot of higher learning institutes have situations where they are teaching, but it's theoretical knowledge without the practical skills. And this creates an issue because a lot of people then leave and they don't have the leave the higher institutions and they don't have the practical skills needed to actually go on and do something useful. You have skills mismatch. So oftentimes there is this gap between the education systems and the private sector or public sector players that would be employing the youth. And so what the skills mismatch does is that it creates a situation where the people who have actually graduated and finished can't get into the labor force because they don't have the right type of skills. Another thing is lack of technical training. So if we think back to about 30 years ago in Nigeria's history, polytechnics were a place you could go to and you could actually get jobs after finishing from polytechnics. Then also people, especially in areas where it's quite handy or technical, so even things like engineering, people liked the graduates from polytechnics because they found them to be very practical. So there were a lot of vocational education systems that were focused on this technical training, but now that's not the case anymore. And so there is that gap in the technical training, especially when you need hands-on technical training. There's also a digital skills gap. This has been growing over the years, but there is still a digital skills gap that has affected people's ability to actually take advantage of a lot of the digital opportunities. There are limited upskilling programs. So as mentioned earlier, employability is not just something about when you finish school, it's a lifelong thing. So how do you ensure that people are upskilling, whether it's on the job or other things they can do even while in the labor force to ensure they're still relevant? And these are just a few of the challenges, right? We could go on and on, but we know we're very familiar with all these challenges and how it's played out over the past few years. So what can we do about this? There are a number of things. One is the possibility to revamp the education system. So how do we ensure that the education system is relevant and the education system is flexible to be able to respond promptly to the emerging skill needs, right? So how do you ensure that that's the case? The second is active participation of the private sector. So remember we had said one of the key issues is limited linkages between the educational institutions and the people that are going to be taking up the graduates from these educational institutions. So how do we ensure that the private sector can play an active role, and employers are working with education and training institutions to ensure the provision of relevant skills, whether that's apprenticeship places, on-the-job training to facilitate upgrading and adaptation of skills. And also to ensure that these people can adopt forms of work that would be able to make the most of existing skills. Private sector players could either be a key provider of the skills training or you could also, they could also offer services to other firms and individuals. And we've seen cases of some banks, before they actually get new graduates into their organizations, they would do like a 3 month training course where those new graduates will go through training with other institutions before they get formally accepted into the organization. So how do we rethink things like that? The third is, how do we prioritize TVET's training methods? And for this, as mentioned, there is a need to emphasize technical training. In countries like Germany, vocational and technical training is an integral part of the educational system. And it's one of the reasons why they've been very good at manufacturing some of the best cars that we could ever drive. And so how do we ensure that we're incorporating those methods into what we're doing? And this could also, some of the issues we've seen with prioritizing TVET training methods is that, as mentioned, a lot of employers would prioritize getting graduates from universities rather than the vocational training places or the polytechnics. So how do we incentivize employers to hire from TVET institutions? I think a key part of this is that TVET institutions need to be training people in a way that is relevant. But if that's the case, how do we incentivize employers to hire from those institutions? How do we also improve the visibility and accessibility of technical services that are offered by these TVET institutions? There is also the need to engage the private sector in the TVET course design and review to ensure that the private sector feels bought into what the TVET institutions are doing, and also ensure that employers' awareness of TVET institutions are improved. And finally is focus on lifelong learning. So it's really important to ensure that people are reskilling over time so that they don't get obsolete within the marketplace. So what's next? So given everything that we've discussed in terms of what employability is, the youth employment situation within the country, the challenges that we're facing, and what the opportunities are, what could we do next to improve this? The first thing is we need to understand and effectively assess skill needs that can be addressed through education and training systems. So one of the issues we have is that we have data gaps, and we don't know like the areas that are working well, the areas that are not working well. Some organizations have started working to address this, but we need to do it on a more holistic basis and do it across a lot of things. How do we ensure that we actually have the data to be able to effectively analyze this? And these education and training systems could be both public and private. Second is, how do we begin to address the market failures and or the policy gaps that might be reducing incentives to invest in training at the firm level? So as mentioned earlier on, we need sector-wide collaborations, right? Because these market failures and policy gaps are happening because people are working in silos and there are limited incentives to invest in training at the firm level for like the on-the-job training, upskilling, things like that. So we need to ensure that there are sector-wide collaborations, whether different stakeholders that are able to come work together. Third is leveraging technology to improve skills. We've already seen increased use cases of this, whether that's people taking courses online, getting remote work online. But how do we ensure that we're leveraging this so it's not something that is accessible to just a few people, but is accessible to more people and more widely across the country? And it could even be things like how you're cascading things in universities or through training institutions and getting that out to the public. And then finally, taking a systems approach and partnering with unusual suspects to address constraints holistically. I think one of the biggest problems is we've been addressing employability for a while in this country, but there are different siloed approaches, right? So most of the transformative solutions are going to involve the governments, the educators, and employers working together to solve the skill gap at a sector level. And a systems approach is something that is mutually reinforcing, where the different players are coming together using the different tools, so whether it's the digital tools, the education systems, using everything involved. And by the time everybody's working together, there is no bucketed and siloed way, and things are working synchronically, and so it's able to reinforce each other. And these collaborations, what it does is that it could also help reduce the cost among the stakeholders, because if everybody's working together, then the cost can be reduced among the stakeholders, which would actually improve the return on investment for everyone. And so how do we ensure that this is happening? And so this is what I would hope we're doing over the next few years to improve employability and improve our opportunities for growth, because as we know, unemployment can significantly dampen the growth in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chimdi, for that wonderful presentation. So our next speaker would be Mr. William Suma, who has over 18 years of professional experience in the field of international development and governance. His experience spans academia, the NGO sector, and now the UN. At the UNDP Nigeria, William serves as a senior advisor and program manager, coordinating youth empowerment, innovation, and crisis response efforts. In Nigeria, he is the focal point of the Nigeria Jubilee Fellows Program, a flagship initiative aimed at connecting fresh graduates with opportunities in the private and public sector entities. Prior to joining UNDP Nigeria, William served as UNDP's Zimbabwe's core governance advisor. He holds a PhD in development studies from the Center for Development Research at the University of Bonn in Germany. So over to you, Mr. William Suma.
So thank you so much, Margaret, once again, and the American Business Council for providing us with this opportunity. And I think I stand on a very strong context that was shared by Chimdi from Delberg, and really appreciate just the grounding of the opportunities and the challenges that exist within, whether it's the employability space, whether it's the youth empowerment space or the talent space. And I think mine is to just probably reflect with you a little bit on a product that UNDP, under the leadership of the federal government and with support from the European Union, has deployed on the Nigerian market. And the goal really is to nurture sort of like the next generation of leaders, and really thinking about that today. And I think the reasons are well known. The context that was laid was very, very clear. So I will jump through the context and perhaps speak a little bit about this fellows program. What is it? And hopefully we can have a bit of a reflection jointly with yourselves as we skim through it. So I think I'll just refreshing with perhaps those who might not have heard about the program or those who are hearing about it for the first time. This is a program that has gone through an extensive design process, starting off in January, probably January 2021, but design and thinking that began in 2020, triggered really by COVID. And I think COVID was a wake-up moment for all of us in terms of the need to think about the future of work, to think about how people learn, to think about the opportunities and the challenges of talent, but most importantly, the future of work. I think COVID was a wake-up call. It exacerbated and opened up a lot of vulnerabilities that we already knew, but it also reminded us, at least within the development space, on the need to really rethink the whole aspect of youth employability. And that set in motion this journey that we are here sharing with yourselves. And so the Jubilee Fellows Program, let me see, apologies for that. was therefore designed to achieve, I would say, three main objectives. We were concerned about the gap, or should I say the missing link between learning and earning. So there's normally this very period of uncertainty when a young person completes university, for example, completes the National Youth Service Corps. There is a gap that happens between completing your National Youth Service and plugging into the labor market or the business market. And we have been speaking a lot with talent management companies, and one of the areas that is coming up is that that period, the moment it gets to the second year, it becomes the most dangerous part for a young person. That is the time when a young person is easy to be influenced. When you've just finished your youth service corps, you're still excited, you're energized, the world is at your feet. It is okay. If you don't get a job immediately, that's fine. If you don't get absorbed at your place of work, that's okay. The moment it gets to the second year, then anxiety checks in, then frustration checks in. And that is a point where for talent management and talent acquisition, experts will say the second year then becomes a very delicate part. And that is where it is easy to become a catchment area for all the socioeconomic negativities or political negativities that we see happening. And so we thought, can we build a bridge that really connects young people from this learning journey to an earning journey, and hence the Jubilee Fellows program. But hopefully as we do that, can we also think about a talent funnel? So a pool of talent that the private, public, startups, SME ecosystem can tap into. So almost build an ecosystem of talent that the private and the public sector can tap into, because when you engage with industry, whether it is the public sector or the private sector, one of the main pain points is really the lack or the dearth of market-ready expertise, talent that is ready to be deployed in the field. And therefore, can the Jubilee Fellows program assume that role and prepare market-ready, future-proof talent that then the private and the public sector, the development sector can tap into, while being cognizant of the reality that that there is a growing number of young people getting out of our universities. And important to clarify that this really is looking at universities and higher polytechnics and tertiary institutions as well. And we also thought that as we are building this model and hopefully working towards this funnel, can we prototype around 20,000 fresh graduates every year? Just with the ambition of being able to connect them, of course, to opportunities where possible, and most importantly, to ensure that we can connect them to a learning journey through a 12-month placement process. And so this is really what, if I was to say, what is the Jubilee Fellows program, this is what it is. It is linking and connecting young people transitioning from learning to earning, building a talent a pool of talent that private public sector can tap into, but in doing that also connecting and prototyping that model through 20,000 fresh graduates every year in this particular sector. And so I think it's just from a context perspective, and therefore the design itself happened and had two major phases. And just for purposes of context, we completed the design in 2021, as I mentioned, triggered really in mid-2020, where we had to put together a full blueprint of the program, the standard operating procedures, the outreach strategy, and an end-to-end digital system that allows for all the practices and the processes of the program, from application to offboarding into the alumni network, to happen through a digitized system. And again, this was a co-creation process where we engaged a number of private sector to understand their pain points. We engaged a lot of learners and learning institutions to understand their pain points in terms of accessing work, engaged with policymakers to understand some of the policy challenges and some of the policy limitations when it comes to youth employability and the socioeconomic or the political economy of unemployment. And how does this program perhaps lend itself in that regard? And of course, the second phase was then the launch of the program, where we had to ensure that it's properly appraised, setting up the governance and implementation systems. And of course, then the program was officially launched by His Excellency, the President, in August 21. initiating the open call, which I'm going to speak to in a few minutes. In terms of the governance of the program, just for purposes of understanding how the program is structured, the program is structured with 4 main pillars for purposes of accountability, but ensuring efficiency of process. On one hand, you've got a very high-level platform, public policy platform chaired by the Vice President. And the idea really here is to ensure that there's a very, at the apex of the country within the presidency, there is a whole of government engagement around the Jubilee Fellows program. So there's a high level policy engagement. There is a strategic public-private sector dialogue that ensures effective coordination, but also institutionalization of the program. The idea is for the Jubilee Fellows program not to degenerate into another development project that is going to end with funding, for example, but to make sure it's institutionalized. And vital to mention that the federal government has invested finances in the program, and therefore it is a proper private-public partnership investment in that regard, of course, with UN and UNDP's implementation capacity. But we also thought that it's really important to ensure that this is a private sector facing program that has, it's a placement program that has a very strong private sector facing lens. And therefore it was important to set up a fellows advisory group, largely led and co-chaired and chaired by business leaders. And the idea was to advise the program on how to link and connect effectively with the private sector, to sustain partnerships, to advise on future priorities, and then aspects of monitoring, evaluation, and reporting being extremely critical in that regard. And therefore, the outreach and the engagement that we are having today is largely inspired by this component where the president of General Electric, the vice president of General Electric, Mr. Mohammed, he is the co-chair of the Fellows Advisory Group. And he thought, could we perhaps consider having an engagement with the Business Council on the Jubilee Fellows program? And so that is one of the critical mandates of this group. And then, of course, we've got the program steering committee that is convened jointly by the UNDP resident representative and the Federal Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment. And the goal here with this particular program steering committee is to provide the overall policy direction, the strategic oversight, policy planning, and program sustainability as well. And as the case for all similar programs, we've got a fellows management unit that is split between Lagos and Abuja. We've got our talent management and private sector engagement team that sits out of Lagos. We've got our impact measurement and learning design and government relations and liaison, and sitting in Abuja to ensure there's coherence within government and development community, but there's also a broader understanding of how to ensure that there's sustained engagement with private sector as well as with the learning community much more broadly. And then our question is, how is a program financed? There's a financing instrument for the program, so an agile, innovative instrument that taps into financing both from government and public sector finance, including crowdfunding models where fellows can be adopted by individuals, development partners and multilaterals like the UN, for example, private sector, business, and corporate. So there's a single financing instrument, the Jubilee Fellows Fund, which again is in place and provides the mechanism through which the program is funded. The single largest seed investment into the program is euro 44 million by the European Union. And this has been complemented by financing from the UN as well as from the federal government of Nigeria. And private sector entities are also providing financing to the program. And this is continuing to grow as a funding instrument for the Jubilee. Perhaps just a bit of reflection in terms of how did we issue the call, how did we get fellows, and I will give a bit of an insight in terms of the numbers. And here looking at the program that targeted fresh graduates, a series of outreach initiatives ranging from open calls in traditional and new media. As I mentioned, we've got an end-to-end digital platform. So those are calls that went out on the 6th of September, closed on the 20th of October. We had outreach through public professional youth associations, through universities, the National Youth Service Corps and state level structures, but also through civil society organizations and youth organizations. And the goal really was to ensure that the program is widely known and that we have prospective applicants into the program. And what did this lead to? So we had over 365,000 applicants in a span of 6 weeks. And this again was from across the country. It's a national program. And of course, then the challenge that we had as a team is then how to screen this to the 20,000 available slots per year for each and every cohort. And then the assessment now, and that is now the process of screening through and really looking at how do we then get to the place where we have a roster of the 20,000. And here again, just a refresher on the requirements, the minimum requirements. These are fresh graduates, and so important to clarify that these are individuals who graduated after 2017, 2018. So the fresh graduates completed the National Youth Service Corps. Majority of them do not have experience, but they've got a very clear idea of where their future lies. And so in this regard, the question was, how do we then sift through the 365 to the 20,000? So it was important for us to have access to their certification, to ensure that they've also completed the National Youth Service Corps to align with the government processes. There's a very strong motivation letter, including clear learning needs and development goals as well. And then, of course, the process of long listing complete with cognitive tests as well as the ranking. And I will share a little bit about that process, particularly for those who might be keen to journey with us on this program. And so when you look through this particular flow, it was basically the long listing of applicants who meet the minimum requirements. We contracted and we have outsourced the talent management component to Joberman, a well-known Nigerian talent management and employability company that is leading this process. So they administered cognitive tests to the long list. They also administered soft skills training to the long list, and based on the performance, especially of the cognitive test, they came up with a rank at levels of beginning, intermediate, experience, and proficiency. And the idea really was to ensure that you're connecting the application, the motivation, and the learning goals and the learning objectives of the fellow to their performance on the cognitive test. And then therefore that helps to determine the rank of the top 20. And these are how the numbers are looking at. So from 365, we ended up with 118,600 profiles that were long listed into the pool of applicants, having met the basic minimum requirements. And then we now filtered through to 20,000 pre-selected fellows from 36 states and FCT in place. And you can see from the graph, this really shows you the education background of the 20,000, all the way from commerce and finance, earth and environmental science, studies, natural sciences, humanities, management studies, engineering and technology, social sciences, medical sciences, and commerce and finance as well. And so the ambition that we have, given that this particular process only began in June 2022, of the selection, matching, and placement, we have the ambition of placing at least or matching at least 5,000 by the end of 2022. So just in terms of context, in terms of where we are, it's important to provide this information. And then, of course, from an employer perspective, and these are who we are referring to as host organizations, and perhaps majority of you on this call, we're hoping that you could be those potential hosts as well, that you can provide a chance and a helping hand to these young fellows, and as they contribute as well to your bottom line at some stage. What is the process around employer assessment and verification? And again, here, very basic information that we require. Are you registered as an entity for companies? And then there's, of course, different requirements if you're non-private entity. The statutory documents, perhaps including non-discriminatory policies, your internal systems. And the idea is to make sure that there is capacity internally to be able to foster learning and development of these young people. And hopefully, as we do that, that they also contribute towards the bottom line that exists. And then, of course, existing operations and clear role requirements and resource needs, including job descriptions. And therefore, the process of verification includes the operations, the capacity to host, and role definition. Because at the end of the day is that while this is a personal development journey, the goal is also to ensure that as much as is possible, the fellows or the young people can contribute towards the bottom line of the company as well. And what were the results of this exercise? So we had slightly over 7,000 private and public sector entities that expressed interest and that were admitted into the database. If you look at the graph on my left, I'm not so sure which direction that's on your side, you will notice a particular pattern that the significant absorption desire and need was largely between the micro and the medium, basically between the micro and the small. So if you look at the medium and the large organizations, it's about a total of about 22%. So that therefore means that the bigger demand was for the micro and the small entities. And of course, that is not surprising. The reason being that, of course, SMEs still remain the engine of the economy, and probably that is where the greater demand is. But it generated a lot of insight and interest, of course, from a foresight and macro planning perspective. But also on the larger, on my right, you can see where are the critical sectors of interest, so ranging all the way from ICT, financial services, education, energy, agriculture and ICT really being the leading in terms of sectors that have expressed interest to host. And again, that is not surprising because you're seeing, again, a very strong push for agriculture, which is one of the leading employers, but at the same time, looking at some of the future sectors like ICT, financial services, social sectors like education and health, energy also breaking in there, and of course, professional services as a whole. And the process of verification is ongoing, and right now we've verified slightly over 7,000 host organizations based on the criteria that I mentioned. And then the next step, technically, which we'll then speak a little bit about, so where are we now, is then the process of matching the fellows to the host organizations. And of course, recognizing that different organizations have got their own demands on how they take in talent, or perhaps how they take in new recruits, if I was to use that. But the Jubilee Fellows Program had its own internal design systems in terms of the matching process as well. So of course, the idea is how do you bring together the training background, the learning needs and the priorities of the fellow, and then you connect them. And there's and this is something that Jobman are supporting us with. And then of course, you align as much as is possible with the skills and the resource needs of the prospective host organizations, and hopefully get an 85% perfect fit. And then that dialogue around the placement then commences. Where are we now? So far, we have 2,548 fellows that have been matched. So we are almost 50% close to the target of 5,000 with a few weeks left. Out of that, 1,410 fellows have begun. So they've commenced. They're literally at work as we're speaking now. And these have been matched in 682 organizations across the country. So in terms of where we are right now and where the program is at the moment. And then, of course, the onboarding process and the placement process, which could be interesting for you if you're thinking, okay, how does this process work if I was to be interested? It is really two different processes. There's the onboarding of the fellows to the Jubilee Fellows Program, and then there's the onboarding of the employers to the Jubilee Fellows Program, because both have to be onboarded. And we're happy to share these slides through you, Margaret, for those who want to look through it a little bit more. But there's a last mile placement where we recognize that host organizations might perhaps want to inject their own final selection process, which we were happy to facilitate depending on the alignment of the needs and the priorities, and also the skill sets that a host organization is looking at. And I'm just trying to rush through also for the sake of time. And so a common question has been, so what happens in these 12 months? A fellow walks into my organization, then what? For example, in addition to them working, what are the learning pillars and the pathways that we have envisaged in and across the almost like the theory of change? So we basically have defined 4 main pathways, or let me say 1 main pathway and a foundation. So our ultimate goal is to see young people develop. So personal development is critical, and then leadership and behavioral skills. And we think that that is a slab upon which 3 things might be able to stand on, which are non-negotiable. Can we have a generation of young people that are digitally literate and that who are productive in everything that they find to do? So digital literacy as not as an option, but as a priority of the now and the future, and most importantly, productivity skills. Could we also transfer civic and social responsibility that we're looking at for a generation that is socially responsible, that is therefore able to think about the village, the family, the community, the country, and therefore that social responsibility that comes with a very strong foundation of knowledge of life skills. But we're also cognizant that young people have gone through an education, and therefore there's an opportunity for them to gain some technical and industry relevant skills, such that if I did banking and I've had the benefit of being placed in a particular bank, that I'm also through these 12 months, I'm gaining very technical and industry related skills as well. And I think it's extremely important that from a learning perspective, these are the pathways. But then what are the pillars for the learning journey? So we have identified 2 main learning platforms or pillars. So one is learning on the job. And then there's another one, the learning that happens in the alumni, which is the talent hub. So for the 12 months when a fellow is placed, there's going to be e-learning processes, upskilling, where third-party training resources can be transferred. That can also be from the program, or it can be from the host organization. We're facilitating peer-to-peer exchanges. This will largely happen virtually through Hangouts. They will also perhaps happen at geopolitical level through physical get-togethers, because the idea is to also foster peer-to-peer learning exchanges. We're seeing fellows organizing themselves in WhatsApp groups, organizing themselves in different platforms, and then also perhaps thinking about group mentorship and coaching as well. And this is also one of our asks, that we'll be looking out for opportunities to mentor and to coach and to transfer particular leadership skills through mentorship and coaching as well. So if you're thinking, what is the learning journey for this? What is the learning trajectory for this program? This is really it. And then, of course, performance measurement, monitoring and evaluation is a critical component, and guidelines have been developed in this regard, where fellows have to develop their own development plans when they begin with growth indicators, and these are monitored over time. But a host organization also is allowed to use their own internal systems to track the performance of fellows, but also to appraise the fellows' performance. And of course, from a programmatic perspective, a 360-degree evaluation of the through the host, the fellow, the program, to look at baselines to track performance and satisfaction will then be critical. And this is an agile, innovative process. We're actually talking about a learning design rather than traditional M&E in this context that we are now onboarding into the team. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from private sector entities that have done similar programs, that have got internship programs. And again, this is an area from a knowledge transfer that we'll be happy to tap into. And then, of course, the final phase is offboarding into the talent, what we're calling the Jubilee Talent Hub. And that is really where we're now in the process of putting together an alumni network with very clear opportunities, with very clear learning projections. We do not want this to be another alumni that does not add value. We don't want it to be another WhatsApp group. We don't want it to be another platform where people exchange on birthdays. That's important. But we really want it to be a transformative space where, from a UN perspective, from a private sector perspective, young people can be connected deliberately to opportunities, that we can be able to look back and say 6 months after being in the alumni network, individual X has gotten a job, individual Y was retained at the place of employment, they are now junior level manager, for example. So it's a place of transformation, and that is the goal around it. And so what is our proposed steps and perhaps our specific ask as we seek to partner with you? We're seeking placement opportunities. That is our immediate need right now, to really scale up placement opportunities to sort of buttress and cover and strengthen the linkages with our micro entities, but most importantly, to also provide credible placement opportunities for these fellows. And really this outreach is to advocate for increased placement. We have slots, we can effectively place 5,000, and we're looking for those opportunities. And therefore, what would you need to do should you be interested? We are happy to reach out to you and perhaps provide, if you can share with us an outline of your resource needs, the areas of work and the sectors of interest where prospective fellows will serve. If you gave us an idea of the geographical locations for placement, we notice that so many companies have a broader spread across the country. And then on our side, of course, we are happy to support you to create your online profile, and then now to have the process of reviewing and assessing the profiles, indication of the commencement dates, and the process of successful onboarding. I think I will skip the next processes and then basically, Margaret, to thank you so much and to thank the members on the call for this opportunity. And hopefully, we hope you can be able to join us. We've created a very short survey. It will take you 5 to 10 minutes, perhaps once you're back on your desk, that you can have a look at. Should you want us to have a bilateral conversation, jump on another call. If you want to learn more about the program, if you think you can be a fantastic knowledge partner, if you've got experience in such interventions and you feel you can share as a mentor, as a coach, we're really looking to learn together as we give a chance to young people, but at the same time, hopefully contribute towards the bottom line of the organizations. Apologies for taking long, but thank you so much for listening to me, and thanks, and back to you, Margaret.
Thank you so much, Mr. William Suma. That was a brilliant presentation. So the next item will be questions and answers. Please kindly drop your questions in the chat box while I read them out to the presenters. Thank you. Please, if we have questions, can we drop the questions in the chat box or signify by hand raise?
I have a question. Can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My question goes to the first speaker on employability. Chimdi, please, can you address employability in Nigeria, which has a lot to do with our, I don't know how to even start to, I don't know how generation that our curriculum has been. It's a cake, our unplanned duplication of courses in our higher institutions, deterioration of physical facilities, massification of student numbers. You see students sitting on the ground, see students, let's say mass communication department. You see a hall that is meant for 40 students, you see 200 to 500 students, those hanging at the windows and doors. And the upsurge of various forms of social aids in our institutions, exam malpractice, certificate falsification, and the likes of it. The list goes on and on and on. And when these students come out, you find out that they are not employable because the platform under which they pass through to get this employment didn't prepare them for this job they're applying for. Please, can you address this?
Definitely, and I think you raised all the critical issues that for the lack of time, I couldn't go into when I talked about the poor educational system. There is a part of it that is about the delivery. So there is something on, first of all, the content, the delivery of the content, and then the supporting infrastructure to enable students. And as you mentioned rightly, there is significant deterioration, especially in our public universities where most people go to, and this deterioration has happened over the past few years. I think the first thing is in terms of the content. So one, a lot of the content is not fit for purpose anymore. If you have a lecturer that is teaching engineering, and the engineering textbooks is using it from 25 years ago, it shows that there'll be a lot that students to come out into real life and would not be able to just understand and fully understand, right? They'll, of course, the engineering principles remain the same. The application needs to be updated and changed. Even in things like mass communication, right? If you look at communication right now, the way social media plays a key role in mass communication, it shows that you can't just apply things from previous years. So that's one of the problems we're having with content. But then how is the content delivered? And that's also a problem, right? Because I think some of the things you mentioned, the content is not delivered in the right way. And in terms of the unplanned duplication of courses, I think this comes back to the university oversight, right? Whether it's from the university registrar down, is how do you think about the courses in a holistic way? Some people even have situations where you have this set of courses you can do, and then you have some electives you need to choose from, but then there are electives in other departments that will be interesting, right? But you can't do them because you have this set list of electives. You have in developed countries people that can do a major in something and a minor in something very different, right? You see somebody with a major in mathematics and then a minor in something like geography or social studies or some random thing. What that means is people can, do things that is a bit more robust. We don't have any of that here. So unfortunately, and we could go on, you mentioned the massification of student numbers, which of course we all know, thousands of people listening in. There's been a lot of studies that have shown the appropriate students to lecturer ratio. A lot of our students don't have, a lot of our schools don't have the appropriate ratio, right? And then the exam malpractice and all of that. I think at the end of the day, what all this means is reducing the employability of the students. If first of all, the students are living with a set of skills that are not relevant to the job market as it is today, then that's going to be a problem, right? Or if they're not equipped with the know-how, so even how our courses are delivered in such a way that you're giving, the assignments you're giving, you're basically giving something to regurgitate, rather than trying to apply knowledge. That's why some of the best business schools in the world focus on using the case study method, so that it's very practical and you're doing something based on that. A lot of us don't have that in the universities here in this country. And then, so that's one thing around the set of skills. The second part is what you mentioned about exam malpractice and the social ills. This gets to the attitude. If you've already learned to cut corners, while you're trying to study, then of course, when you get to the labor force, your attitude would want to continue and perpetrate some of that. And I think these things are things that there are different places to address them, right? In the public universities, how do we begin to incentivize the lecturers, the university registrars and all of that, to be able to assess this better? So I think one of the key things in some institutions is you're having lecturer feedback forms.
Mr. William, we have a question for you, and it says, is the UNDP program incentivized to encourage organizations to provide more space for internships?
So I'm not, I saw the question, and thank you so much, Obehi, for the question. I'm not so sure that I fully understand the question. Perhaps if you could ask it. I want to make sure that I fully understand. When you say is the program incentivized to encourage organizations to provide more spaces for internships? I'm not so sure that I fully understand the question.
So the essence of the question is, what kind of incentive is available for organizations? For instance, is there a partnership between UNDP and the federal government to encourage entities to take up students, and they get some kind of waivers or they get some kind of support towards their business, to strengthen the business and help them have more people on their platform from the UNDP projects? That's what I mean.
Okay, no, not at all. I think just to be sincere and honest from the beginning, I think the idea and the thinking around it at the design stage was that there's a shared understanding that on one hand, there's need to, if I think about the question that was asked earlier about how do we shape and how do we build an employable cohort? I think when we designed the program, the idea around it was that everybody is looking to provide an opportunity for talent. I think majority of us, including UNDP, we work with interns. We work with, we have junior level entry programs for young people. And of course, we do that because we realize that the process of transitioning an entry person as an intern perhaps into the pipeline of an employee requires a certain level of investment. Financially, for example, I know that if I was to take in an intern from a UNDP perspective, I have to pay the intern, I have to dedicate significant amount of time in terms of course, on one, having a budget line to have them on board, and at the same time going through the process of selection and recruitment, and then of course then invest in them in terms of providing them with the necessary learning opportunity. What we, however, have done with the Jubilee Fellows program is that for host organizations that are keen to host and take on board fresh graduates, we pay the stipend for the fellow in the tune of 100,000 Naira per month for each and every fellow. And hopefully that then frees the immediate monetary requirement for the host organization. And then the only ask on our side then is the ability of the organization to then provide substantive work opportunity. So in this case, it's really substantive work that is in line with the operations of the organization, and hopefully an accompaniment process of learning. So in that sense, the program as designed now does not have an additional incentive structure for host organizations. We are now thinking a lot more practically about what sort of incentive structure can be provided more for the micro or the really small entities, because we realize that for the micro and the smaller entities, perhaps while they might be looking at the program as an opportunity to get available labor, they might not have the internal capacities and the systems to facilitate proper knowledge transfer, in as much as significant learning can happen in those spaces, just because it's all hands on deck compared to an intern who's coming into a larger organization that has got full talent systems on board. So we are thinking a little bit about what do we do with the micro and the smaller entities, and how can we perhaps, even if not through UNDP and not through the program, how can we connect them with other partners that are at the forefront of micro and SME development, for example, to onboard them in that regard. So I would say perhaps that's what we are looking out for, but we have not systematized an incentive structure in that regard. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, it helps, William. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think I'm also seeing a comment from Sarah Paul for the NJFP, Would there be a different curriculum or provision to ensure relevance of the fellows after placement in the participating organizations? If the fellows are not retained at the organization, would the training provided during the program give them an advantage in the labor market and strengthen the employability chances? Sarah, that's really our hope. And so there's multiple pathways in this particular program. And as I shared a little bit on the learning journey of the program, the idea is that, and the assumption is that significant learning happens when people are doing, so learning on the job is increasingly becoming a measure of skills transfer. And therefore, we think that by gaining an additional 1 year of practical experience in the industry, whether at private or public level, it puts you in good stead to be able to compete on the labor market. But we are also moving a step further and saying you're also going to be surrounded by industry leaders. So if you're placed within a bank, but you're supporting the marketing and the sales, how do you get surrounded by your peers who are also in the same area of work, and how do you get supported by coaches, such that in a way we're also future-proofing the talent? And that's where there's certain learning propositions across the 12 months that are also looking for futuristic skill sets. So the idea is not to reproduce the theory that the fresh graduates learned in university, but perhaps to transfer some of the emerging and new skills and perhaps new choices as well. So in my thinking, we hope that at least by the time you're breaking out, let's say you're not retained, you're better equipped to compete on the labor market. You've at least gained an additional 1 year of experience. You have earned modestly as you learn. So the immediate pain point of getting by has been addressed. And hopefully you've also built a network and strengthened your what is it called? Your resources to be able to break into the labor market. So that is really the intention. And that's something we can only achieve jointly with yourselves as potential partners as well.
Thank you, Mr. William. We have one more question. Can I go ahead, please?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, it says, does your organization have plans towards revamping the curriculum, NUC accreditation, student work placement, and incessant strikes and funding?
So the Jubilee Fellows Program, and when I go back to the governance architecture, the idea is that the program provides a platform for bridging the gap between the private sector, which is really the fulcrum of industry in the country, the public sector where the learning ecosystem sits, and the learners. And the idea really is to find ways in which we can leverage the Jubilee Fellows Program as a pathway for having candid conversations around not just the future of work, but I think there was a question around the learning environment. There's a question about skills that are being transferred to our young people. Are they fit for purpose? Are they future ready? Do we have employable cohorts that are graduating? Statistics and numbers from NBS and others are showing there's 500,000 graduates getting out of our universities and 1.2 enrolling. So in 2, 3, 4 years, that's an entire Eswatini, Swaziland that is getting out of university in 3, 4 years. Out of those, what is the absorption capacity? When you speak to industry leaders, they're saying the challenge is really not the jobs. The challenge is finding people who they can be able to plug in and get a return on investment. So the Jubilee Fellows Program then is positioned to be much more than just a fellowship program. And that is why we also set up this very high level platform that should also look at the political economy and the socioeconomic dynamics of unemployment, that youth unemployment is not just an economic issue. It's also a policy issue. It's an institutional issue. It's a social-cultural issue. And the process of revamping and rethinking with foresight what our education system should evolve through, while the program might not be able to address that directly, it provides a platform for that reflection to have. And again, kudos to the American Business Council, for example. The conversation we're having now is an opportunity to reimagine and rethink some of these processes. And hopefully now trigger this discussion, to imagine expanding the web now with the commission, the University Commission, with Ministry of Education, with federal government, with thematic committees in Parliament that are making decisions from a policy perspective. How do we rethink and reimagine the jobs of the future? That means we need to also think through the learning environment that our children are going through, the infrastructure. If you look at children who've just emerged out of, or who are susceptible to the strikes that have lasted for over half a year, what are the implications of their education needs if you want to compare them to the rest of the kids in private schools or those who are studying out of the country that have not had those interruptions? So while the program does not directly address some of those issues, we think that the data that is coming out of these pieces, this work, and the platforms that have been created by the UN in collaboration with government and international partners, and with a coalition of private sector and with learning institutions, can be a powerful platform for engagement and perhaps hopefully transforming the way the ecosystem around talent nurturing, which is really happening, whether it's in our tertiary institutions or at the university. Obehi, that would be my response to that.
Thank you very much, Mr. William. Okay. In the absence of no other question, I'd like to call on Mr. Mohammed Mijindadi to give the vote of thanks.
So thanks, Obehi and Margaret, on behalf of the American Business Council. I really wanted to say thank you, first and foremost, to the two specialists who had spoken today. I think Chimdi from Dalberg and William from the UNDP. Thanks for sharing your insights. I found it very helpful, especially in just setting the stage for how important employability will be as we think about economic growth in our country. I've been involved with William and the UNDP team, specifically on the Joint Fellowship Program. And I did agree with William that this was a great way to share some of the great work that the UNDP, in partnership with the Office of the Vice President, have been working on in trying to help solve this key gap on unemployment, which I think was one of the key anchors that Chimdi had spoken about. So I wanted to take the opportunity to thank both of you for sharing insights. To all the participants, I was a bit concerned initially when they were asking for questions, but I really liked the engagement towards the end. Thanks for making the time. I do know that the team will be sharing links of the materials that had been presented today. I think I saw something from Will earlier. But if you do have questions or follow-ups, please feel free to connect with either of the presenters through the American Business Council. But thank you for making the time today. And I wanted to just share that on behalf of the team here today. So over to you, Obehi.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mohammed. Thank you everyone again. And on behalf of the American Business Council, we appreciate your time. Thank you to the speakers, Mr. William Suma and Mrs. Chimdi. I would hand over to Ms. Margaret.
Thank you very much. I don't think there's anything else to add. No, to me, Mohammed has done the thank you, and I really appreciate the time, and thank you very much. Mohammed, by the way, is the managing director, vice president of the GE, and a member of the American Business Council board. So thank you, everyone, and bye-bye.